Okay, so now actually we are live on Facebook, on YouTube, and if you give me a couple of seconds, we would be live on LinkedIn. Please smile. Five more. Okay, please smile. And we are live on LinkedIn too. Matthew, hello. It's great to have you. Thank you very much for being on this show.
Outstanding to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I really wonder what I could say as an introduction because you're so very well known for everybody who is keen about cybersecurity, but I still prepared a few lines. Matthew Rosenquist is essentially the Sherpa of the cybersecurity world. Matthew has a massive 24-year run at Intel, where he built their security strategy from the ground up, and he's now the voice of reason for nearly 200,000 followers. He's not a fearmonger who just talks about hackers. No, he is a pragmatist who figures out how to keep businesses running without losing their shirts to cyber risks. Whether he's advising boards or predicting the next big threat, Matthew focuses on making security sustainable and effective rather than just a technical headache. Matthew, hello, and please tell us to start, before we start talking about cybersecurity and career-wise, tell us please about Matthew, the person, how you've become the beautiful person we see before us today.
Well, you said Sherpa, and I don't think I've ever been described as a Sherpa before. The visuals I'm getting on that, maybe climbing Mount Everest in the cold, shivering, suffering from oxygen deprivation in our cyber digital world. Okay, I'm kind of like that. I have a passion for this, and I've been doing cybersecurity and security in general for over 36 years now. Mm-hmm. And I have a passion for the challenge. I love technology, so it's a great marriage between the security aspects where you're dealing with an adversary, somebody who has their own intentions and objectives and motivations, and they're going to pursue things. And you're working essentially against them, right? They're working against your interests. You're trying to protect things. So having that adversarial engagement, I love, I absolutely love. And then marrying that with technology and to protect how technology is transforming humankind, I think it's just amazing. So this is an area that I'm passionate about, and I always have been. I always will be. And so that's really where my focus is. And although what we see in the news today, which really started weeks or months ago, is interesting, my focus is looking forward, right? We have to see what's coming, because if we don't, we can't adapt fast enough. So everything that I do is really with that eye looking forward. That's why I always have strategist in my name. But that's just a little bit about me. I'm here to make digital technology more trustworthy.
Great. Thank you very much for this. That's really a beautiful introduction. Okay, let me start with my first question. Why do you always seem to be just behind the 8 ball?
Well, that's easy, right? Because we talk about the attackers, and our entire industry is really focused on them and what they do. If attackers everywhere in the world just suddenly decided to stop, we're not going to attack things or do bad things, we wouldn't have to have security. But the fact is, they are out there and they do have their motivations. And so they will always maintain the initiative, right? It's a phrasing that the military uses because, again, an adversarial environment. When your enemy can always maintain the initiative, they decide when something gets attacked, what gets attacked, how it gets attacked, right? Whether they're going to persist, whether it's just a feint or a spoiling attack, because they're really going over here instead, right? And so we have to respond to that. Now, we have home field defense, right? We have home field advantage, so we can set up defenses and tripwires and to understand things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to the innovation and the actions of the attackers, and we have to then respond to that. So we're always behind the 8 ball from that perspective.
But do you agree with me that it very much looks, at least for Mr. and Mrs. Everybody, maybe to you it looks different. Maybe you feel that we are like a step ahead, at least in some areas. But for Mr. and Mrs. Everybody, it really looks like a cat and mouse game. And I wonder whether this will ever end.
It won't. It shouldn't, right? Not based on the rules of the game. The rules of the game is the opponent always gets to move first. So we're always going to play catch up. Now, that doesn't mean that we cannot prepare for that eventuality so that we can prevent certain things, that we can quickly detect and respond to others. So we can, in some sense, prevent a certain amount of risk. And in another sense, we can reduce the amount of risk that does happen. Those are two different things, right? So there's a model that I use, and it's a continuous improvement model, and it's got 4 sections, right? You predict and you prevent, and that avoids loss. And then you detect and you respond, and that essentially minimizes losses of attacks or incidents that do happen. And it continually feeds itself, right, with knowledge and information so you can get better and better because the attacker is doing the same. But it's kind of important to know that we won't protect against everything. In fact, it's not even our goal. Our goal is not to prevent everything. That would be wildly too expensive and probably even technically impossible. Absolutely. So we're here to manage the risk, which means there is an acceptable level of risk that we're going to take every single day.
Right. Let's see where all of this coffee is going. What is the one risk that keeps you up at night, especially with all the coffee you drink?
I don't stay up at night. I get a solid 4 hours.
4 hours.
I'm normally in bed by 2 a.m., 2:30 in the morning, and I'm up by 5:30, 6 o'clock, something like that. Right now, it's really around technology innovation. It's around AI, and I know it's almost a trope at this point, but AI fundamentally changes a lot of the long-standing structures, processes, and capabilities that we've matured over the years. So it's almost like a reset in different areas, and that creates an incredible amount of chaos to understand what's going to be impacted. How do I completely change my processes and tools and expectations? And then how do I convince executive management to support that change before everything comes crashing down? So AI is it's an incredible tool, both for the attackers as well as the defenders, right? That's what a great tool does. It can be used in different ways. You know, how do we get ahead of that and understand how the attackers, how they're going to use it to our detriment, and how we can use it and implement to our benefit?
Absolutely. I'm really impressed. You're so smart that almost for every question, you're kind of preparing the next question as if you've had a view actually of my questions.
It's the coffee. It's Sherpa coffee, apparently.
My next question, actually, as you were talking about both sides, so attackers and companies, attackers and authorities actually getting their hands on AI. And as we said or alluded in the beginning, that we are always trying to catch up. The question is, can AI actually save the day, or is it just more hype?
It will be, without a doubt, our worst enemy and our best friend. The problem is timing. Is the attackers are always going to leap forward to new innovations and new tools and use them for their advantage before we can do the same. So there's this window of opportunity attackers get. It's their advantage. And so they get to use all the newest, latest, greatest tools and implement it in their attack methods before we really get to use mature AI tools that integrate with our other tool sets and processes to help get the benefit at the same scale. So it's a matter of timing. Very powerful tool, but if you get to use it first, you have a big advantage.
Absolutely. Matthew, recently, Jean-Louis Richet in Paris at the Sorbonne published an article talking about how hackers have been evolving, and that hackers are not anymore the kind of hoodie guy sitting in a dark room working on his PC, Today, they are really, really big organizations, multi-part organizations, where you have one part that actually attacks, another that actually facilitates or coordinates, and then another organization that plays the broker, that collects the money. But my question to you is, those organizations, those hacker organizations, to the best of my knowledge, they are not as big or as powerful, or they do not have the huge budgets of huge companies, which, forgive me if I have to say, still get hacked. How come the hackers are always many steps ahead of us, and that even our best companies with the best budgets who genuinely invested in cybersecurity still sometimes get hacked?
It's a great question. So this is one of the juicy questions that has actually been around for more than a decade, almost 2 decades. So I'm going to answer it, but I'm going to answer it in 2 parts. So bear with me. The first part is when we talk about the hackers or the bad guys, that is an oversimplistic view. So almost 2.5 decades ago, when I was with Intel, I was part of a think tank there. I'm actually still part of that think tank. It's external now. And we characterized who are these attackers, and we essentially broke them up into archetypes. So, and each archetype category has a different level of resources and expertise and their willingness to break the law and do things like that. Right now, in my current list that I use with my clients, I've got 26 different archetypes. Now, there's a group of them that are just internal. Right? You have the malicious internal insider, you've got the accidental one, you've got the untrained one, you've got things of that sort. But when we talk about the external one, we've got, the normal kind of script kiddie cyber criminal, and that's what we kind of associate with the, down in the basement, whatnot. But it's a kind of a petty cyber criminal. And we've got also an organized cyber criminal. And these are cyber criminal organizations that are well funded. They've got an HR department, they've got research and development, they've got hiring, right? And all of these things. But we have many others, right? We have cyber terrorists, we have several different nation states, and this is where I get into my second one, the second half of the answer here. But these 26 different archetypes is really what we face. And it's very easy for us to oversimplify and say, hey, we're just worried about the cyber criminal. The one that sent me the phishing message in my email, right? But in reality, it is a mosaic of different types of threat actors with different objectives, different methods, different capabilities. Okay, so that's the first answer as a foundation.
Yes, sir.
One of the primary reasons that even the most security savvy and invested companies, right, in cybersecurity still get hacked is because we have a couple of threat agents out there that actually are better funded, right? And these are the nation states. So over the past 15 to 20 years, we've had nation states create offensive capabilities. That means tooling, vulnerability, detection capabilities, exploit capabilities, attack infrastructures, all of those kinds of tools and processes and talent. They have developed all of this with the backing of billions and billions of dollars. And you might think, okay, well, it's a nation state, right? They're going to attack other nation states. That doesn't affect me. Well, it actually does. Because here's the thing. If a nation state spends, I don't know, let's say 10 or $20 million, either buying or detecting their own top tier vulnerability and creating complex exploit code, the moment they push the red button and release it, it goes out to the world, right? Maybe it's targeting some other nation, but it's out there. It's on the web, right? Yes. Everybody grabs it, including those other threat actors, especially organized cyber criminals. They grab that code, they grab that and figure out the exploit or the vulnerability. They tear it apart. Then they use pieces of that in their own cyber criminal activities. And so it's a waterfall effect. It chains all the way down to that little script kiddie who's using some third-party hacker tool Well, the authors of that tool have incorporated those aspects, and we see this all the time. We see when a major attack comes out with a new vulnerability, yes, the primary threat actor is using it, but within 24, 48, 72 hours, now we're seeing other threat actors incorporated into their tool sets. So this cascade effect, this waterfall effect, helps everybody. And it's led by governments who are spending billions and billions of dollars on their offensive capabilities. So if you want to blame somebody, blame the governments all over the world. It's not a particular government. It's all the governments over the world that are investing in this, both in offense and defense, right? And that then trickles down. And now we're seeing innovation like AI be able to supercharge that. And now it's not even going to be the nation states that can find those vulnerabilities. It can be anybody. So the job gets more complex over time, but there are a lot of investments out there. And once they're applied, it becomes a community benefit across the attacker landscape.
Yes.
And there's no single company that can fight against all of that. So.
Indeed. One question to go back to what you mentioned earlier and about mitigating risk and how risk actually moves from one provider to another, and that very often actually we only have visibility maybe of one layer, which is the direct providers of our providers, and we don't see who is providing them, especially that now everything has become on the cloud, right? So the providers and the providers of the providers, recursively, endlessly, they are all on the cloud. My question to you is, first, aren't we too much dependent on the cloud these days? And doesn't that mean that no matter what we do, there will always be actually some level of risk that we will have to manage, mitigate, whatever you want to say?
Yes, there will always be risk, no doubt about it. But that's actually the way we want it. When you walk out of your house or your apartment every day and get in your car or step onto a bus or a train, you are accepting a certain amount of risk. There are car accidents, there are train accidents, you could get mugged, right? But we're okay with that, right? We accept that level of risk. So we don't strive for a zero risk world. The same is true in our digital world, in our digital ecosystem. We know there's going to be risks, and that's okay, but we want them manageable. So yes, there will always be risk. Now, what you talked about is this supply chain, right? We call it third-party risk. So yes, you may have your website, but it's on a web provider, but that web provider has a whole bunch of other business partners that keep their services up and running. And those people need critical infrastructure. They need telecommunications and power and everything. So we're all tied together. It is a mass web, if you will, not just of communications, but of dependencies out there. And that's part of the risk that we do have to manage. We know there's going to be risks there, but we need to be working with our downstream and even upstream partners to figure out, all right, is this acceptable risk or not? And when something bad happens, again, part of that risk is how do we mitigate some of those losses to an acceptable level? So again, there's prediction prevention, there's detection, there's response. All of that helps us, maintain that risk profile we want when we look at the overall impacts or undesired impacts that we want to manage to.
Matthew, I want to go back to the question I put earlier to you about how AI is changing the whole thing.
Ooh.
If AI is changing the whole thing for every single one of our direct and indirect, for level 1, level 2, level 3, and so beyond providers, and that everybody is using some form of AI directly or being impacted by some form of AI, and that those AI models sometimes today get upgraded daily, how could you still manage the risk associated with all of those dependencies, knowing that almost everybody is using AI that is updating itself daily?
So it comes down to pace and what you're doing with the technology. So the attackers are using AI to find vulnerabilities, create exploits, and then conduct or orchestrate attacks. right? And that's where a lot of the risks that we're currently talking about. There are other risks with AI, right? AI creating its own problems, undermining infrastructure all by itself. But if we look at the cyber risk, it's really about our adversaries using it ahead. Okay, great. We understand that. We also know in order for us to keep pace, because what AI provides them is the new capabilities, better, much, much faster speed at accomplishing things, right? Which means they can scale. All right. We also have to increase our speed. We have to be able to scale and adapt as fast as the attackers. We essentially have to keep pace with our adversaries. It's a race. So we also will have to use AI. It's not just their tool. We have to use it on the security side. The challenge comes in when we talk about they get to have it first, right? Which means they don't have to wait for a completely vetted, solid tool that's enterprise class and ready. They can grab that code, the updated code from that day, and apply it to their attacks. If it breaks something, who cares, right? Whereas on the security side, we can't be that reckless. We have to wait until it's vetted and tested and proven, and we're going to roll it out slowly, right? Because we can do no harm. That's part of our ethos. So we can't haphazardly just use the latest versions or tools. It has to be tested. It has to be vetted. Otherwise, we lose confidence in the trust that we've built up. So we have to deal with that. Now, at the same time, our own environment we're protecting is also integrating AI, which creates greater attack surface. It enables attackers to get by potentially our established security controls and processes. So it makes things exponentially more difficult at that pace as well. So it's all sorts of challenges that we're dealing with right now, and probably for the next 36 months before we get some level of stability in.
Hopefully. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, actually, about attackers very often, actually not worrying about something that breaks, where we have to worry about something that breaks, and we have to be very careful what we do and how we do it, and we have to keep record of everything, and we have to keep a track of everything, and we have to abide by all laws, including laws that say, for example, like GDPR and other government security, that, for example, if we are aware of an attack, then we have a very limited amount of time. Sometimes it's 3 days before actually we make a public confession, and we tell all of our partners that we have been hacked, which they don't have. Take the time that you need, no matter how long that is, to share with me your very, very long experience dealing with CEOs who very often, by the way, do not understand those laws and do not understand why those have been imposed the way they have been imposed, and how you can work eventually with crisis cells inside attacked companies, dealing with hackers who have no ethos, no laws to govern them, and who, frankly, don't worry what happens.
That's a great and complex question. So before I answer, let me give a little bit of my background. So one of the things that I did at Intel after I had built Intel's first security operations center and managed it is I was Intel's first incident commander, cyber incident commander. So we built essentially that CERT team. Today we call it CERT teams, right? Computer emergency response teams. But it was essentially in charge of responding anytime Intel Corporation got attacked, or any of our assets, or even vendors, right? And so I had my own war room, and we had, everything set up, and I could wake up 6,000 people in the middle of the night. So I understand it from a crisis perspective, right? The regulatory rules that enterprises have to comply with, the executives understand that. So if I go to an executive and since that role, I advise a lot of companies, and they'll bring me in on crisis events too to help. And part of my role is to communicate to the executive leadership, to the CEO, to the C-suite, and even to the board to help them with that. Now, if it's a regulatory requirement, it's actually a really easy discussion because they all know they're held accountable, and the board has a fiduciary duty So if you say, yeah, there's a legal requirement, there's a regulatory requirement that we have to do X, Y, and Z, everybody will nod and say, okay, we at least have to do that. What comes after that, what isn't part of the regulatory mandates, that's where it's more of a gray area, where there is more opportunity to go one way or another. And that's really where the business values and objectives really need to come in and play. There are many companies that rely and work extremely closely with their third-party vendors, right? Supply chain below them and above them. And that is crucial to them, and they treasure that. It's very easy when a crisis starts to happen to go, we should probably notify them that you give them a heads up. Let them know we're working something. We don't have all the details yet, but here's what we're kind of concerned about, right?
Exactly.
And as a CISO, I would do this often. I would do this with my supplier. I'd pick up the phone, call their CISO, and go, hey, I got a shake. I got something going on. Just give you a heads up. They would start looking as well and then feeding me telemetry as I was feeding them information as well. So it becomes a teamwork effort, right? There are other companies who are a little less mature in those relationships, and they just want to keep it contained, right? In fact, if you talk to any lawyer at the executive level, the first thing their knee-jerk reaction is don't tell anybody. Don't tell, especially the media, but don't tell our partners. Don't let it go outside the company. And in some cases, they'll even say, don't even tell anybody in the company. Well, that's counterproductive. If you're trying to gather information, if you're trying to work the issue, to understand the scope and the vectors that's going on, the attack vectors, it's counterproductive. So having conversations at the executive level, when the corporate attorney is saying, okay, we're just not going to talk about this at all, keep it contained and just kind of let us know, but don't tell anybody. That's counterproductive. It's important to have a leader go in and go, I like the idea. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to contain the blast radius here, but that's going to impede my ability to contain this. So expect a 5 to 10x more impact if that's the strategy we want to take. If everybody's okay with a 500 to 1,000% more impact, right, then we can go down that path. But I want the executive leadership to make that conscious decision. And in almost every case, they go, oh, we don't want that much impact, right? We understand that keeping it contained is reasonable. What can we do to balance that? Great. Here's some ideas. Here's the plan on how we're going to do that. Right. And then everybody starts to feel a little bit more comfortable. But it takes that level of experience and communication to get everybody up on the same page and get past the initial hurdle. Oh, my gosh, how did this bad thing happen? Well, bad things do happen. Right. And that may be above our accepted risk level. Right. Or it might be below it. It might be perfectly acceptable. I had a client one time. And they had a very methodical cybersecurity program. And it was very clear, right, to the executives, hey, we are trying to protect against a data breach. We expect, based on the level of controls that you want to invest and the friction that it impacts the business, it's probably going to be once every 2 or 3 years that there'll be a data breach. And we're expecting it to be under the 500 record mark, right? If you want to invest more in security and have more friction, we can improve those numbers. And if you want to take budget away, well, then attacks are going to happen sooner and they're going to be bigger. And the executive level was, no, this is the right amount to spend in business friction. Well, a breach happened, right? And immediately, and I was with the CISO, we go in and tell the C-suite and the board, and some people jumped up and they immediately started attacking the CISO. How did you let this happen?
Yes, it's his mistake.
Cautiously interjected. I said, by the way, this is not a loss. I said, you really need to be congratulating your CISO because this attack is exactly what he predicted based on the investment you made for security. I said, he's right on target. It's been 3 years. And this is what he said based on your investment. So congratulations, everyone. You achieved exactly, you got exactly what you paid for.
Exactly.
This is great. Now, if you want to pay more, he can improve those numbers. If you want to take budget away from him because you think he's incompetent, well, then this is going to happen more often. But it's your choice. And they all looked at me and they all looked at him and they're like, okay, what do we do? No, we like this, right? But it changed the perception of you
Absolutely.
failed to nope, he actually succeeded.
Yeah, because he told you this will
So
happen.
a lot of it's perception.
Yes. Yes. Talking about perception and talking about what you mentioned earlier, that you wanted executive leadership to take informed decisions. What are, let's say, the top 3 blind spots that you very often see working with CEOs?
Yeah, the first one's easy. The first one is they believe that cybersecurity is technical. It's just all technical, right?
Yeah.
Because you're defending the technology, so you must be technical. So, and if it's technical, right, if we assume that it's just technical, and it's not, by the way,
Yes.
there is technology, there is people involved, the attackers, the defenders, the users, so there's people involved, but then there's also process that connects the two. And all of those can be targeted and undermine and create risk. So, but if your mindset is this is a technology problem, I'm just going to assume that. I'm not even going to validate that. I just assume, I just know it's a technology problem. The next thing in your mind is, well, if it's a technology problem, it can be fixed, right? If IT has a problem with the server, they go and they fix it and the problem's gone. Okay, so cybersecurity is technology, therefore it's fixable. All right, if it's fixable, there's no risk, right? If you do your job and you fix the problem, there's no risk. So if anything bad happens, obviously you didn't do your job because you didn't fix it. This whole chain of thought is flawed. And yet many executive leaders, this is the path they fall into. And so, part of my role is when I go in and talk with, I get called in by boards and C-suites and CISOs to kind of help them with their cybersecurity strategy and communication. That's what I find a lot. And nobody has sat down with them and said, it's not just technology, right? And there is an acceptable level of risk and you get to define it. You're empowered, right? You get to decide that. But if you fall into that, now it is a pass-fail, pass-fail situation. And eventually, cybersecurity will fail under those conditions because we don't protect against everything. We can't. It's impossible. Right?
Exactly.
So those are the big pitfalls initially. There are other ones as well, right? And there's problems on the cybersecurity leadership side in effectively communicating as well. So there's a big amount of transformation that is happening right now in the cybersecurity leadership space, especially as it's elevating into the board level discussions. So we have a lot of growth and maturity to do to make sure we are performing, communicating, and collaborating at that level necessary for board oversight.
Yeah. Okay. Something I heard, not once, from generally engaged, competent CEOs who really believe that they need to dedicate the necessary resources for cybersecurity to keep their digital assets safe, is that they are basically being told that no matter how much you invest, 100% security does not exist. You're always taking some risk, which gave them the impression that actually, so no matter what, they are just sitting ducks. Especially as you say,
the defeatist, perspective.
Especially as you said in the beginning, that some of those organizations, they are really, really huge and they have budgets beyond what Mr. and Mrs. Everybody imagine.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So we see this a lot. We see it a lot with small and medium, but we also see it in divisions and business units within larger corporations as well. And the defeatist attitude is, we can't protect against everything, so why try? Why invest? Right? And again, that is that binary view of cybersecurity. Either it works or it doesn't. Either it's on or it's off. It's a 1, it's a 0, right?
Yes.
And in reality, that's not the case. And so when we sit down and we can talk about them and go, well, hey, do you wear your seatbelts? Do you lock your doors at night? Well, just because you lock your door at night, somebody can kick it in. I guarantee I can kick it in, right? But you do that, right? If you know somebody can kick in your door, does that mean you're not going to have a door at all? You're just going to take the doors off your house? Probably not. It's not binary.
Yes.
Right? There are reasonable controls as part of this risk management that can return a value to you. If you have 0 controls, you are an easy target. If you're an easy target, you will be targeted and you will be victimized. So let's at least get above that, right? Let's look at what your neighbors are doing. Do they have a deadbolt lock? Do they lock their doors at night? You probably at least want to do that. Maybe a little more. And this is where you start getting into the value discussions around protection. And it's really a tough discussion to have because unlike the other business units that can quantitatively provide value, right? Sales can show you the amount of revenue. Marketing can show you the number of qualified leads, right? All of that. In cybersecurity, we can't show the benefit. We can just show the damage, right? We can only tabulate when bad things happen. In physics, you can't measure darkness. You can only measure light. You can't measure coldness. You can only measure heat. Well, the same thing for the most part is true in cybersecurity. You can't measure what risk or loss you've prevented in most cases, but you can show how much losses you actually got incurred, right? So it becomes by default a negative story.
Yes. Let's say that let's imagine that we're sitting together with a chairman or a board or a CEO, and we're talking about the importance of resilience for business continuity. And let's imagine that the CEO says, what is resilient for you? How do you define resilience? What is a resilient company?
Yeah, so and resilience is one of those interesting buzzwords. So first off, I'll make sure I define the terminology. Right now, people are using resilience as simply a placeholder for good risk management, and it's actually not. Resilience is your ability to rapidly respond, recover from when something bad happens. Okay?
Yes, sir.
If nothing bad happens ever, right, in a perfect world, you don't have to worry about resilience because nothing bad is ever going to happen. So when we look at that cycle, right, where you've got prediction and prevention, and that avoids loss, and detection and response, and that minimizes loss, resilience is really the bottom half of that. It's how do I detect when something goes wrong? I got to detect it quickly and accurately, and then I have to institute my response capabilities, all with the purpose of minimizing the impact and getting back into a normal state. That's your resilience. And we talk so much about it the past probably 8-9 years because that was one of the weakest parts of the entire cycle. Everybody focused on prevention. I'm just going to invest in prevention. They weren't looking at rapidly detecting when bad things come in because, again, they see the problem as binary. If I don't prevent it, I fail. So I'm going to throw everything into prevention, right? And I'm trying to prevent all bad things. Right. And so these misperceptions really start creating a stream of poor decision making and poor strategy. But when you realize, okay, I'm just trying to manage the risk, I know some bad things are going to happen, well, then I need a mechanism to quickly detect, right, and accurately feed into my response. And I need a crisis response. I need a response capability to contain that and get back into normal things and then learn from it all. That's resilience. So when I talk to executives, I say, yes, we need to do resilience because that minimizes the loss of bad things that happen. And bad things
Yes.
will happen. Some
Yeah.
we're okay with happening, right?
Yes.
There are black swan events that it would be astronomically expensive to try and prevent.
And very
I give you a
interesting.
funny story about that one, which is just mind blowing. But
Please.
you've got the other part of it as well, which is to predict and prevent. That's where we're optimizing our ability to avoid loss. Your highest ROI, but we need the resilience piece, that bottom half as well, because for things that do get through that safety net, we need to be able to detect and respond to minimize the impact, minimize your business disruption. And when executives hear it that way, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, yeah, okay. So I'm going to spend most of my stuff on the kind of avoidance, biggest ROI, right? I'm business speak now, biggest ROI there. But to keep us up and running, I also have to invest in this response capability or resilience. That makes sense. Okay, great. And now we have a platform, a foundation to move forward in a constructive way, investing in both.
Great. Next big question, if you allow me. We spoke about AI and how AI actually could play for both sides, for our side and for the attacker side. Maybe a much more worrying source would be potential quantum computing in the hands of the attackers. What do you see? What do you hear about this?
Again, quantum computing is one of those innovations that's coming, and it's not going to be one tool or one thing. Like AI, it's going to be very, very broad. There's hardware aspects of it. There's software. There's encryption aspects of it. There's communication. There's all sorts of different aspects, right? But quantum is kind of the technology that all these innovations will leverage. The same thing with AI, right? AI is the foundation. How it's being used, there's a huge plethora of different use cases. And the same thing is going to be true with quantum. Now, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're worried about a few particular use cases of this, right?
Mhm.
We're worried about encryption that we use to secure our communications, our data, transactions, all those things. The quantum computers and computing capabilities, right, different algorithms, can undermine many of those algorithms that traditional computers just really can't in a reasonable amount of time. So as that compute capability comes into play using certain algorithms, it can undermine the very foundation of encryption that we use when we log into our bank, when we're on our web pages and you see the little lock sign, when we're sending communications securely through our email systems. All of that could potentially be undermined. And we need to essentially upgrade ourselves to quantum resistant algorithms. But this is going to be one of the things that undermines the trust of digital technology and the use of it in software and hardware and everything else if we don't get ahead of it. So the quantum computers, the ones that you see now, IBM has and so forth, D-Link and whatnot, they're powerful, but they're just burgeoning, right?
Yes.
This is the equivalent of the the integrated circuits back in the 70s and 80s, where you had a computer that could be a calculator on your built in your watch. It's basically at that level, right?
Yes.
It's not a supercomputer. We look at them and go, that's amazing. And back in the 70s, when we looked at our little computer that had 80 lines of black and white text, we thought that was amazing.
We were thrown back.
That's nothing compared to what we have now. The same evolution will happen in quantum. And as we get to a certain level of viable qubits, right? Qubits, that it's a processing term, right? These processors that have error correction and stability for memory and things of that sort, the power transformation for certain kinds of calculations, not all, right? It's not a superhero that can do everything, but for certain kinds of calculations, we're talking exponential capabilities compared to what we have today?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Last question, and it's only to show what's on your mind. Yeah. What would be the first thing you would do if you were the CISO of the entire world?
Ooh. Of the entire world. Wow.
Yes.
I would set a strategy, right? I would sit down and communicate with everybody that's involved, right? The leaders, the companies, the businesses, everybody, and say, here's our strategy, right? We want to make your life safe. We want to make your computing and your innovation and your business secure and healthy and not dangerous and private, and respect all of these things. We want your success, right? And so from a security strategy, I'm here to help make your innovation, your success possible. So I'm going to work with you, right? I don't know your company, your business, your country, your culture, but I'm going to work with all the parties involved to figure out how we can accelerate your success, your safety, your delivery of services, or your acceptance of services. That's my role. I'm going to work with you. We're going to make this better, and we're going to find that right balance. And then I would sit down with the different teams, understanding what they need, what's a priority to them. And this is what I do in companies. I will sit down with every C-suite officer. And when I sit down with the HR, right, the head of HR, they're like, hey, I'm really worried about confidentiality. Yeah, I get it. Confidentiality. I sit down with the finance people and they're like, I really care about integrity. Don't let somebody move my decimal point, right? So all my transactions and all my files and data, it's the integrity. I would rather have the data exposed than have somebody mess with it and me not know. Okay, no, I got it, integrity, right? I go to IT and they're like, availability. Everything's got to be up all the time. I need my 4 nines or 5 nines. Okay, got it, right? And so, but I go to each one and everyone has a different priority. As the cybersecurity lead, right, as the CISO, I have to understand that. And then I work with the CEO and I work with the board to say, okay, well, what's the business objectives? Right. And in many cases, it's revenue, market share growth, this margins, and great. Now I've got the context to start building a plan that can reasonably meet those expectations and yet still give options. Right. One of the worst things the CISO can do is go into the C-suite and say, here's the plan. It's this or nothing. Give me this bag of money. That's not the way it works, not in business. You go in and say, okay, this is the level I want to achieve. This is what it's going to cost. But here are the dials. You can dial that up. You can dial that down. You are the executive leadership, right?
Yes.
You decide if you want to dial up the investment and the friction in the environment. I can give you better security. If you want to dial it down because there's other business priorities, I get it. You get it. That's fine. You choose to dial it down and you're going to accept that risk level. This is probably where we're going to land. This is going to be the how often and how impactful the things are going to be. And as long as you're making well-informed decisions, you're now facilitating. As a CISO, you're coming in as a subject matter expert with a plan and the ability to negotiate and help the audience, help the decision makers come to a rational, informed decision that they can accept. Because if they say, we're just going to give you half your budget and make sure nothing bad happens, well, it doesn't work that way. You failed as a CISO. You need the right scenario is they say, we're going to cut your budget in half and we realize we're going to have twice as much or 5 times as much impacts over the next year or 2 years.
Yes.
We know it, but we have other business. We got to get these other programs out. We're going to accept that risk for this year. Okay, let me document that because we may have to revisit this conversation.
Exactly.
But we're going to document it. I get it. Okay, I'm not happy from a risk perspective, right? Because I want to manage the risk the best possible. I want the biggest budget and all that. But as a executive level manager, right, as a C-suite participant, I know there's business decisions that have to be made. Okay, yeah, I can execute to that, right? And that's where you become a partner to the C-suite. That's where you become an asset to the board when you're doing that. And that's tough. It's a tough order for leaders, cybersecurity leaders, which typically rose through the technical ranks, not through the business ranks.
Yes.
Which means they may lack the communication capabilities. They may lack the vernacular, right? They may go into a board meeting and not understand half the acronyms, right? And they may try and come in and talk about cybersecurity in a technical perspective. We had this many alerts and we blocked this many things and we had this many new ACLs, and what the heck is that? This is a business meeting. We are business professionals. You have to translate that for us into business impacts, business value, business risk. If you can do that, you're going to be successful as a CISO. If you can't do that, you are going to have friction and barriers at every step of the way. And ultimately, you will be blamed for something that may have been out of your control, right? But the stress level then shoots up every single day.
Thank you very much. And I hope we would see you again. I very much hope we would see you again. Thank you very much, Matthew. It was really
My
great.
pleasure.
Thank
Great
you.
conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.